can join me. Our Most High God, we thank you for this afternoon. We exalt your holy name for how far you, Lord, has brought us. As we are about to take up this training, we ask you, Lord, that you, Lord, should open our minds and give us a good memory to be able to understand whatever thing that we are going to learn. We also commit the facilitators into your care, that we ask that you, Lord, will see us through, so that at the end of this webinar, all glory and honor will be given unto you. Amen. Okay. So invite Mrs. Brenda Mills Papo to give us the welcome remarks.
Thank you, Esther. Good afternoon, honorable members. May I take this opportunity to apologize for our late start. There was a mishap in our communication of the time, and so we wanted to wait more for members to join. So forgive us for taking your time. So this afternoon we are gathered and we are continuing with our series on the standards. We are all aware that next year our standards are changing, and the standards being our Bible and our Quran, it will be good for us to know this, to know what is inside, so that we'll be able to apply it and not find ourselves wanting. So this afternoon we have met, we are continuing with our standards, and we'll be looking at domain 3, looking at governing the internal audit function. As we all know, governance is key to every endeavor that we find ourselves, because it determines how we set our structure, we define our standards, we look at the people that we're working with, the resources, and managing our performance. And that is what applies in this standard. We want to look at how the internal audit can function well. And you agree that for where we sit, we being able to function well is not entirely dependent on us. So the standard will also tell us how we can collaborate with our stakeholders, chief being the board and the senior management, to ensure that we are set out well and provided all the resources we need to be able to function well. To do this this afternoon, one of our committee members on the Certification and Professional Development Committee will help us do that. We take this opportunity to thank him for availing himself and want to encourage us to pay attention, and when the opportunity is given, let's do well and contribute. May I, on this note, on behalf of the President, the Governing Council, and the Committee on Certification and Professional Development, welcome you to our webinar series on the standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Brenda. Please, let's observe a few housekeeping rules. Let's all try to mute our mics. And secondly, in case you have any question, let's drop it into the chat box, which will be answered after the presentation. So for today, our resource person is in the person of Mr. Samuel Reuben Ofori. A little info about our resource person. He's a certified internal auditor and holds a certification in risk management assurance, which is by IIA Global. He's also a member of the ICAG and a fellow of ACCA. Mr. Samuel also holds other professional qualifications that, if I'm to add, I'm sure you'll know that early. He has an extensive experience in internal audit and risk management. Samuel is also a dedicated facilitator of the IIA certification program and also facilitates other internal audit risk management training. He works with the VRA, that is Volta River Authority, as an audit manager responsible for financial and internal audit. On this note, kindly help me to welcome our facilitator for today, Mr. Samuel Reuben Ofori, your member. And kindly, you have 45 minutes for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And good morning, colleagues and seniors, audit and non-audit staff. I'll share my screen and then zoom directly into the presentation. Kindly confirm if you can see my screen, please.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, please, you can
Yes.
see.
Okay. Okay, so sorry, 1 second. Sorry, I shared the wrong screen. If you can confirm if you can see my screen, please.
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you so much. So we'll be looking at an overview of the global internal audit standards. I think a couple of weeks ago, our able facilitator Nas took us through domains 1 and 2. And as Brenda mentioned at the beginning, we are just going to look at domain 3, which has to deal with governing the internal audit function. This is a very important domain because it sets the tone for what happens in the internal audit function. It also affects how the internal audit function interacts with the audit committee and senior management. In terms of what we'll be doing today, we'll be looking at overview of the domain 3. And as mentioned a few weeks ago, that the standards have the main domains, they have principles, and then they have associated standards. So it's the same thing for domain 3, which we are looking at today. It has principles, 3 of them, and then it has some standards. So we'll look at the overview of the domain. We'll look at principles 6, 7, and 8, and then each of them have standards. So we'll look at them as well. There are 3 core principles under domain 3, which is governing the internal audit function. The first one is principle 6, which is authorized by the board. Under this core principle, we have 3 standards. Overall, we'll be looking at 9 standards, but under principle 6, authorized by the board, we have 3 standards. Standard 6.1. So the principle is 6, but the standards are 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. 6.1 is internal audit mandate. 6.2 is internal audit charter. And then 6.3 is board and senior management support. Then we have principle 7, which also has 2 standards. Standard 7.1, organizational independence, and then standard 7.2, the chief audit executive, or we will call head of audit or director audit, that particular person, however it's called in our organization, the qualifications that are required for that designation. Then we have principle 8, overseen by the board. I think we all agree that internal audit is overseen by the board. Of course, in most cases, the audit committee plays a role as a subcommittee of the board to oversee the internal audit function. Under principle 8, we have 4 standards. Standard 8.1 will be on board interaction. Standard 8.2 on resources relating to the audit department. Standard 8.3 is on quality generally, internal and external assessments. And then standard 8.4 zooms in on external quality assessment. So we'll start with the overview of domain 3. And it places some responsibilities on the chief audit executive to work closely with the board. Now, unlike all the other domains, one of the unique things about domain 3 is that even though it's a responsibility of the chief audit executive, it involves a lot of interactions with the senior management and the audit committee in our case. And without them, domain 3 will be ineffective, as we will see. So the CAE works closely with the board to establish the function, position it independently, and oversee it. And the 3 bullets there cover the 3 principles we spoke about. And then senior management responsibility to support the board and promote governance of the internal audit function. So you'd realize throughout this presentation that a lot of emphasis will be placed on the role of senior management and the board when it comes to governance. And then you'd also see that there's something called essential conditions required from senior management and the board. This is unique to Domain 3 because, as I said, when it comes to governance, you can't leave out senior management and the board. So these are the objectives of the domain. The CAE has a responsibility to discuss with senior management and the board key things relating to Domain 3. They include the purpose of internal auditing, which is Domain 1, which Anas handled for us. They include essential conditions of each standard. So for each of the standards we'll look at today, you see there's something called essential conditions that primarily talk about what the board should do as their responsibility and what senior management should do. So ideally, this discussion should include people who, not just internal auditors per se, but board members, audit committee members, and senior management, because they have roles to play in this standard. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the chief audit executive or the head of the internal audit department is responsible for making senior management and executives aware, because they won't take these standards in most cases to read it on their own. The CAE also has a responsibility to discuss with senior management and the board the impact of failing to support those essential conditions, which I'm saying we would look at under each of the standards. Again, when it comes to the nature and the frequency of these discussions with senior management and the board, there are certain conditions. One, if the standards change significantly. So for instance, we were using a set of standards from 2017, and in 2024, some new standards have been released. If there are some significant changes to the standards, or certain aspects of the standard require certain changes and interactions with the board and senior management or with the work of internal audit, then that's a trigger for a discussion with senior management and the board. So even if the internal audit department has been existing for a while, these are triggers that may require you to do a rediscussion with senior management and the board, and then it also helps you to determine how frequent you should have these discussions. If the internal audit department is a new department, then of course these requirements, i.e. the principles and the standards and the essential conditions, need to be discussed with senior management and the board. If the head of internal audit is new, it needs to be discussed with senior management and the board. Or the head of internal audit may not necessarily be new, but may be moved into the position newly, and so those discussions will need to be had. And then finally, if there are significant changes to the board, there's a need to have discussions on Domain 3, because the people you dealt with in the past have left. They understand their role in supporting internal audit. Some senior management may understand the role in supporting internal audit, but if the board has been changed, which is the case in the public sector after a couple of years, then it's also a trigger to rediscuss Domain 3, just to bring senior management and especially the board abreast with the support they are required to give to the internal audit department for it to fulfill its mandate. There are instances that some of the standards we are going to look at, specifically the essential conditions, because these essential conditions are placing responsibilities on the board and some responsibilities on senior management. There may be certain instances that the board, or let me say the audit committee or management, senior management, may disagree with certain roles they need to play to support the internal audit function. If these disagreements are satisfactory, you only need to explain the impact as a head of internal audit, the impact of fulfillment of the IIA purpose. So you are explaining to them that if they do not fulfill these requirements that support the internal audit department, this is the impact it's going to have on fulfilling the purpose or the mandate of the internal audit department. Again, it may well be that one or two of the things they disagree on, there are some compensating conditions. So even though they disagree with certain aspects of those essential conditions, which we will look at shortly, there are some alternative structures, processes in place that mean that the effect of them not complying or wanting to follow those essential conditions doesn't impact the internal audit work or the department or the independence of the department or objectivity of the staff so much. Again, reasons for agreeing that these essential conditions may not be necessary needs to be documented by the head of internal audit. One of the things we'll look at today is a quality assurance improvement program. And anytime the internal audit department is assessed, either by an external professional body or even by the IIA, you need to have some evidence of why certain support systems are not in place if you are going strictly by the standards. And so you need to document reasons for agreeing that certain conditions that the board have said they will not comply with are fine, and it's not necessary for them to. In instances where the head of internal audit feels that their disagreement to support you or to comply with certain aspects of the essential conditions or the standards we'll be looking at, then the head of internal audit feels, I don't agree that they don't agree. Then you need to state reason for the agreement and share it with the board and senior management. And then if you have an external assessor coming in, either because you are doing your own quality assurance improvement program, external assessment, or the IIA, which sort of regulates what internal auditors do in the public sector, is assessing you. You've stated these disagreements down and you share with them when they are assessing you. So that sort of summarizes the key requirements or an overview of what Domain 3, which is governing the internal audit function, is about. We'll quickly look at Principle 6 and the requirements of Principle 6, and then we'll zoom into each of the standards under Principle 6. Principle 6 is authorized by the board, and the requirement or the overview of the requirement says that the board establishes, approves, and supports the mandate of the internal audit department or the internal audit function. So as an overview for Principle 6, we are saying that the internal audit department's mandate is from the board. In some instances, like in Ghana, we have certain regulations in the PFMA, the IIA regulations that also put some responsibilities on the internal audit department. So that may be applicable. And I must also mention that as we go through these slides, anytime we see board, you can interchange it with audit committee or any other subcommittee of the board that handles or interacts directly in terms of functional reporting with the internal audit department. Again, Principle 6, authorized by the board, talks about specifying the authority, role, and responsibility of the department and is captured in the internal audit charter. We'll spend some time on the charter as we look at the standards, so I'll move on. It also enables the internal audit department to provide objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight to both senior management and the board as part of their governance role. And then it facilitates a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluating and improving the effectiveness of GRC, governance, risk management, and control processes. So in a nutshell, what this principle is saying is that the internal audit department, all things being equal, is authorized by the board or the subcommittee of the board, which is the audit committee. And that is why our plan and everything else that relates to the internal audit, those interactions are with the audit committee. And so this is just giving the guidance of what the responsibilities of the CAE or the head of internal audit is, what the responsibilities of the board or the subcommittee of the board, which is the audit committee, and senior management are when it comes to this principle. Standard 6.1, which is the first standard under Principle 6, is about the internal audit mandate. This internal audit mandate is captured in the internal audit charter, or should be captured in the internal audit charter. So what are the requirements of the internal audit mandate? The chief audit executive or the head of internal audit must provide board and senior management information necessary for them to establish the mandate of internal audit. For organizations or public sector organizations or private sector organizations that have already established internal audit functions, this is still important because you still do a review of your internal audit charter, and the mandate is in the charter. And this is just drawing attention that there's a responsibility on the head of internal audit to ensure that the mandate that is captured in the charter is clear, because senior management or the CEO or the chief executive signs on the internal audit charter, and then the board or the audit committee approves it. It's very important that the mandate is clearly stated in there. Again, where it is prescribed in law, either in full or there are some aspects maybe in the PFMA Act or the IIA regulations relating to the mandate of internal audit, again, those should be captured in the internal audit charter, which we will look at shortly. And then it's also part of the CAE's responsibility to determine if changes in circumstances require a rediscussion of the mandate. For instance, if the board chair changes or if the whole board changes, it's important for the head of internal audit to have a rediscussion with this board, new board that has come in, so that the work of internal audit, the independence of internal audit is not inhibited because some new set of people came in. Let me mention that for each of the internal, the standards we are looking at, just as we did for domain 1 and especially domain 2, we'll be looking at requirements, and then we'll be looking at essential conditions. I mentioned at the beginning that due to the nature of the governance structure when it comes to the internal audit department, there are some responsibilities on the board and senior management for this domain, if I should say, to be successful when it comes to the internal audit department. So these are the prerequisites, if I should say, or the essential conditions that the board and senior management must facilitate to ensure that the internal audit mandate is working or is effective. The first is that the board has to discuss the appropriate authority, role, and responsibility of the department with both the CAE and senior management. All three parties need to be in agreement of what the mandate of internal audit is. Again, the board has to approve the internal audit charter. I'm sure we are all aware. And we are saying in that charter, the mandate needs to be stated. So once the charter is approved, it means the mandate is approved as well. Senior management needs to participate in discussion and provide input on expectations for the IIA department to be considered. Even though the mandate of internal audit is clear, you still need to engage senior management. You need to have agreement with senior management for them to fully appreciate the role and position of internal audit. And so they have a responsibility to do that. Again, if internal audit will be respected, recognized, positioned properly in any organization, then senior management needs to support and promote the internal audit mandate throughout the organization. And so I mentioned earlier that if we are having these discussions with the board and senior management, and these responsibilities are accepted and driven, then it should go a long way in helping the internal audit to carry out its mandate. Aside the essential conditions, we also have implementation considerations. That means in trying to implement this standard, these are if I should say, some core things that the CAE, who is usually responsible for this, or who is responsible for this, these are key things that should be considered. Inform and share knowledge about the standard, relevant laws, regulation, and leading practices with senior management and the board. If the Global Internal Audit Standard released in 2024 is what we work with, is what we conform to, is what we use to guide what we do, as I mentioned earlier, senior management and the board will most likely not be aware of these standards, or even if they are aware, they may not have necessarily had the time to read it as you and I would have. So it's a responsibility of the CAE to inform and share knowledge about standards, regulations, and other leading practices that impact the work of internal audit. And again, that feeds into the mandate, and that's why it's being mentioned here. The CAA also needs to discuss the authority of internal audit, the roles of internal audit. The core role of internal audit is actually audit or assurance, and then in some instances, depending on where you work, some aspects of advisory. However, there are some instances that we'll look at a few slides from here. Audit may be asked to do things that are not assurance and they're also not advisory. And so the role needs to be clearly stated. And then where there's a need to go beyond assurance and advisory, we'll look at what needs to be done later. Again, the responsibilities of the internal audit needs to be captured clearly in the mandate as part of the discussions. And then the scope also needs to be discussed. I mentioned earlier that triggers for follow-up discussions with senior management and the board could include changes with the board or senior management. If you are in the private sector or even in the public sector, an acquisition of another business means that some discussions, some changes may happen at the top, or laws and regulations and standards may change, and those may trigger discussions. So these are the requirements that the CAA is supposed to comply with. The essential conditions are things that the board, or let me say the audit committee and senior management, the role they need to play in ensuring that the mandate, the internal audit mandate, can be fulfilled. And then the implementation considerations are things that the CAE should ensure are in place for standard 6.1 to be effective. From an internal assessment review, or if the head of internal audit wants to give themselves comfort or give management comfort or give the audit committee comfort about compliance to this particular standard. In the previous IPPF 2017 standards, there was a bit of subjectivity in really telling if an internal audit department is complying with a particular standard. And so what IIA has done is that they've given some examples of evidences to confirm conformance with each of the standards in the 2024 Global Internal Audit Standards. So for the internal audit mandate, evidences or examples of evidences include minutes of board meetings where the mandate of internal audit was discussed, or the fact that it's embedded in the approved internal audit charter. Again, minutes of board meetings during which any changes to the charter were discussed and approved will also suffice. I must mention here that when it comes to the evidence of conformance, if you undergo any form of external quality assessment, this is what the external assessor would also look at to confirm that the internal audit mandate has been understood by senior management and the board and has been disseminated throughout the organization. And then we move quickly to standard 6.2. I think most of us may be already aware with the internal audit charter. So I'll move quickly through this ones. If there are questions, I'll come back later. What are the requirements when it comes to the internal audit charter under the new Global Internal Audit Standard? The purpose of internal audit, commitment to the standards, mandate and scope, responsibility and expectations of the board, and then the positioning of internal audit need to be clearly documented in the internal audit charter and discussed with senior management and the board. What are the essential conditions? What must the board do? What must senior management do when it comes to the internal audit charter? The board has to engage to identify additional topics for the internal audit charter. Now, depending on the industry you are in, or whether you're in the private or public sector, and then depending on how active your audit committee is, they will just take the charter you present to them. Senior management will recommend it. Audit committee will just take it and sign off and move on. But ideally, what the board should do is they should look out for other topics, other areas that they feel should be in the charter that are relevant to the internal audit. And then this becomes a responsibility of the board to supporting the internal audit department. Again, we know the board is responsible for approving the charter, and then periodic review of the charter with the CAE, especially when there are changes in the head of internal audit, or there are changes in risk or other factors. So if you bring a new person to the institution, it's necessary for the board, as part of their oversight responsibilities, to engage that head on the charter and what is contained in the charter and what is expected of the head of internal audit. Senior management needs to discuss management's expectation with the board and with the head of internal audit for inclusion in the charter. Of course, what senior management will want included in the charter should not infringe on the independence or what we know to be the scope and the mandate of internal audit. But where it is within the framework of what is permitted or what we can do as internal auditors, yes, then senior
Have I lost Samuel, or everybody else has lost him?
Since everybody else have also lost him.
No,
We've lost him.
we can hear you.
He's gone off.
We've lost him. Okay, the speaker has gone off.
Okay, kindly give us some time to get him back online. Thank you.
Hello, sorry, I think my line dropped off briefly. Can I please have hosting rights? It looks like my hosting rights have been disabled.
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Please, my hosting, thank you. Please, can someone confirm whether they heard me in terms of where I got to before the line went off?
You were
For
You're
me, your
talking about
last
the
line,
duties
your
of the
last
senior
line
management.
ahead was "in terms of," and I couldn't hear you again. I don't know if others had.
You were talking about the senior management, what they also have to do as part of the conditions, essential conditions.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. So senior management also has a role to play in terms of the internal audit charter. And that's why it's captured under the essential condition. So I was saying that senior management ideally can make inputs to the internal audit charter, but their inputs should not infringe on the independence of the internal audit department. It should not infringe on our mandate. It should not infringe on our unrestricted access to information, to personnel, to properties, and to the entire organization. But again, just like the board and senior management, we may not see too many instances where the board has done their own research, senior management has done their own research, and are saying, can you include these things in your internal audit charter? And that's why this particular standard is important, because this standard is placing responsibilities on the CAE to make the board and senior management aware of the role they should play as part of their governance role when it comes to the internal audit department, and then specifically for standard 6.2, the role they should play when it comes to the internal audit charter. So given that the requirements of senior management does not infringe on independence or anything else relating to the department, they can make inputs that should be captured in the internal audit charter. That's the reason we even give it to the head of the institution to recommend before the audit committee signs on it. When it comes to implementation considerations, some of the key things, I think this is not too different from what we had under the IPPF 2017. So you need to clearly describe the administrative reporting and the functional reporting clearly. Functional reporting, obviously, to the audit committee, and then administrative reporting to the chief executive CEO or the designated senior management personnel. And then where, especially in our instance in the public sector, we know that the PFMA has certain requirements of internal audit. We know that the IIA regulations have certain requirements. We shouldn't take the internal audit charter template that has been provided by the IIA as it is. It's just generic template just to help you form out, draft out what your internal audit charter should look like. So where the applicable laws and regulations, these should be included inside. In fact, they are going on to say that in certain jurisdictions where there's actually regulation that states that this is exactly what should be in your charter, if it complies wholly or it meets the requirement of your mandate, unrestricted access and all that, it can be substituted for what the IIA has shared with us to guide the preparation of the charter. So they are saying here that it's fully customizable. It should include quality assurance improvement program asset requirements. That is both external and internal, which we'll look at as part of domain 3. It should also talk about safeguards, subjectivity, and independence. And then it should also capture the expectations of the board and senior management. And then it should also capture the frequency of review. This should be agreed with the board. In most instances, it's easy to review the internal audit charter every year. It's usually not a huge document. A review does not necessarily mean you're making changes. So you can review and then tell the audit committee that you've reviewed it, but based on the current environment, based on changes in the standards, based on changes in strategy and risk, nothing of significant changes in the charter, and then resubmit it. So if you choose to do this annually, it needs to be agreed with the board. Some people choose to do it every 2 years or every 3 years. It also needs to be agreed with the board. What are some of the evidences of conformance when it comes to the internal audit charter? Obviously, the charter itself being approved, being there is an evidence for an external person or for a third party to review to ensure we are complying or conforming, if I should say, with standard 6.2. But then again, there may be minutes of board meetings where the charter was discussed. Perhaps it's not been approved, but it has been discussed and the comments from the minutes suggest that it has been accepted. That means whatever draft is given to any third party, they know that it is as effective as an approved one. Again, minutes of board meetings that include evidence of the internal audit charter with the board and senior management. So discussions around the fact that the board and internal audit gave some inputs to the charter will also suffice in terms of evidence. Standard 6.3 is board and senior management support. So even though the essential conditions talk about what the board and senior management need to do when it comes to domain 3, there's also a standard 6.3, which is talking about a more holistic support that the board and senior management needs to give to internal audit. The requirements are that the CAE who drives this coordination and this support from the board and senior management has to supply the board and senior management with the with necessary information to promote the recognition of the department. And so, like I said, many, maybe not all, but many boards and then senior management may not necessarily have the time or be too interested in the activities of internal audit. And so the requirements are placed on the CAE to sort of drive that discussion. And then also to coordinate the department's board communication with senior management to fulfill its responsibilities. What are the essential conditions when it comes to the board and senior management? The board has a responsibility to champion the internal audit department or function. That means whatever publicity, whatever discussions with senior management that the board needs to have to let the organization know that they are supportive of the work of internal audit, they need to do that. They also need to work with senior management to enable unrestricted access. It's in the charter. Senior management recommends it. The board approves it. But in practice, sometimes it may not be always easy to have access to everything: data, records, information, personnel, physical properties, and so on. And so it's a responsibility of the board, to ensure that senior management is actually enabling unrestricted access. The board also has to support the CAE through direct communication. We'll look at that in the next few slides, but the CAE should have the opportunity to have interactions with the board in the absence of senior management. And then where there are any restrictions, the board has a responsibility to determine whether there are restrictions and then support the internal audit department in overcoming those restrictions if they were put in place by senior management deliberately or not. Senior management also has a role to support internal audit recognition in the organization. If the people at the top are, in quote, friendly to internal audit, are supportive of the work of internal audit, then it is natural that all the directorates and all the departments will also be supportive. It's also the responsibility of senior management to enable unrestricted access. There's no one working under the CEO or the chief executive or the managing director who can restrict access to data, records, information, personnel, and physical properties if the CE has not mandated it or has not consciously, unconsciously, deliberately or not communicated that. So once the senior management, or in this case, the CEO, chief executive or MD is supporting the IIA, internal audit department, and also enforcing the fact that they should have unrestricted access, then chances of there being challenges with that are very little. What are the implementation considerations? As I mentioned, private meetings with the board at least annually. The head of internal audit must make it a point to meet with the board at least annually. This is not the typical quarterly audit committee meetings or board meetings where the internal auditor may be invited. But the internal auditor should be able to have, or the head of internal audit should be able to have private meetings with the board. And as I mentioned earlier, board, I'm using board interchangeably with audit committee. So it will be the audit committee chair for most people, at least annually. They are saying that it is a leading practice that if you can meet the head of the audit committee at least on a quarterly basis, it is better, because there's so much that happens in the internal audit department. There are so many challenges with the work we do. There are so many things that are discussed at the audit committee meetings, which it may be appropriate to have some interactions with the head of the audit committee prior to those meetings. And so if you are able to have quarterly meetings rather than once annually, it's even better. Private meetings between or before official board meetings to apprise board of the department, which I just mentioned. We don't also want the case where management feels as if, hey, I heard internal audit went to meet the chair of the audit committee. Are they reporting us on something? Remember, we are trying to foster a collaborative, closer environment with management whilst we keep our independence. So we have to inform senior management of meetings with the board. So it's not a problem to let the chief executive or the MD know that on this date you're having a private meeting, just to bring the board up to speed with what you are doing. It's not an audit committee meeting. You're just bringing the head of the audit committee. You're just apprising the person of where we are, challenges, how well we are doing, and what we need, and all of that. The only caveat here is if management is doing something that you need to report to the audit committee at the blind side of management, then yes, you don't need to inform them, obviously, especially if it involves the people at the top. And then finally, liaising with the board to approve resources and enabling the fulfillment of planned activities. I must say that some of the requirements we'll look at in terms of essential conditions, requirements, or implementation considerations may not be strictly applicable in our jurisdiction. In some countries, the US, UK, and all of that, when it comes to the resources, the budget, and things relating to the internal audit department, it's not determined by management, it's determined by the board or the audit committee of the board. And this is because they are trying to avoid the instance where internal audit is restricted from carrying out its mandate for various reasons. But I think for most private and public organizations in Ghana, that is not the case. Our budgets, resources, and all of that are approved by our administrative reporting, which is to the chief executive or the managing director. What are the evidences of conformance that board and senior management are indeed supporting internal audit? Board minutes indicating review and approval of the plan, the budget, and the resource plan. Again, the budget and the resource plan may not be applicable in our jurisdiction, but at least we know that the audit committee will approve our internal audit plan. And so these will be captured in minutes that an external person or a third party can look at. documentation of discussions with senior management and the board on unrestricted access, and then documentation showing what information should be given to the board by management and the CAE and how frequently this should be done. All these are evidences that external or third parties can look at, especially under the QAIP program, to say that indeed the board and senior management are supporting the work of internal audit. Then we move to the second principle, which is principle 7. Someone should let me know how I'm doing for time as I go on. Principle 7 talks about the internal audit department being positioned independently. And it says that the board establishes and protects the internal audit's functions, independence, and qualification. Overview of positioned independently, principle 7 says that the board is responsible for enabling the independence of the department. We know the definition of independent, it hasn't changed. Freedom from conditions that impair our ability to carry out our responsibilities in an unbiased manner. And then to be able to ensure that we are independent, the key things are that we report directly to the board, we are qualified and positioned at the appropriate level. Standard 7.1 under Principle 7 is about organizational independence. That means the independence of the internal audit department. The requirements of this standard are that the head of internal is supposed to confirm independence annually. If there are any impairments to independence, they also have to be communicated as part of confirming independence. If there were safeguards that were put in place so that the impairments did not impact our independence, because we are reporting this at the end of the year or quarterly, it will not be appropriate to say at the end of the year that these things affected my independence and you are now telling the audit committee. So if there are some safeguards that were implemented to minimize the effect of these independence issues because they weren't discussed previously, it's the responsibility of the head of internal audit to make the audit committee aware. And then to discuss the roles that could infringe on actual, potential, and perceived independence. It's important for the head of internal audit to discuss these roles with senior management and the board. And I just want us to pay attention to the fact that it talks about roles that could infringe actual independence. So there are certain roles that when they are assigned to the internal audit department, in some instances, many of the things we do when it comes to pre-audit, okay, these are things that infringe on our actual independence. And then things that could infringe on our potential independence. It's not infringing on our independence now, but the way it's going, it is likely to infringe on it. And then finally, perceived independence. There are certain roles that may not necessarily infringe on our independence, but by the nature of the role, people may feel that we are not truly independent. So whether it's actual, potential, it could happen, or perceived, because people in the organization and outside the organization will say, because of ABCD roles, we don't think that internal audit department is truly independent. Those need to be discussed as well. If there are roles beyond the core assurance and advisory, as we mentioned, they need to be captured in the internal audit charter with safeguards so that our independence is protected. And then added roles might be included in the charter. So these added roles that are included, if we say that, for instance, we cannot afford to have a compliance section, which is a second line role in the 3 lines model. And so internal audit should play that role. That's fair. But then there should be, if compliance, because of compliance is an auditable unit, that particular audit of compliance should be done by an external party if the audit will be done or needs to be done. And then if the internal audit is assigned to roles beyond what typically falls under assurance and advisory, there should be a transition plan that we are doing it for 3 years while management agrees to establish a compliance function to take over this role. It shouldn't be endless, put in the charter and kept there forever. So there should also be a transition plan so that we know that eventually we won't be playing these roles as the capacity or the expertise or the competency is built internally or outsourced. What are the essential conditions for the board and senior management? So discuss and establish direct reporting. the board will discuss with senior management and CAE. Senior management will ensure that it is established. Support and implement appointment, removal, evaluation, and remuneration of CAE. This is one of the conditions that, again, in our jurisdiction may not be fully applicable because, to the best of my knowledge, most head of internal audits are recruited as part of the regular HR processes. They are remunerated just like the other directors or head of department to be remunerated. Appraisals and everything are the same. In foreign jurisdictions, what you see is, yes, even though HR will work through senior management to recruit a head of internal audit, the list of people being interviewed will go to the audit committee. Senior management with HR will do the interviews, pick the person. They will justify why they pick this person. They will state, usually it's a contract basis. It's a 3-year or 5-year contract. And then based on performance, they renew. When it comes to the appraisal, the salary of the head of internal audit only, excluding the staff, it is determined by management, but the board needs to look at it and see, is there anything in there that could affect the independence? Because if they are supposed to give you X amount and they give you X minus 5, then in order to get to X, the independence of the department may be affected. And so in those jurisdictions, most of those things need to be approved by the audit committee. And then acknowledge the actual or potential impairments for added role and safeguards. If they are added role, like I mentioned, if, for instance, you have to do compliance, then both the board and senior management need to acknowledge that this thing impairs our independence. And so these are the safeguards we are putting in place. This is the transition plan we are putting in place, and so on and so forth. Organizational independence also has a lot to do with where internal audit is positioned. So in some institutions, even though very few, you may see that the highest position for internal audit is a manager, but other departments have directorates. If you are not positioned properly, it will be difficult for you to be independent for various reasons. What are some of the considerations? Functional reporting should exist. Administrative reporting to the CEO or its equivalent is fine with safeguard. This point is now saying in our new standards that administrative reporting need not only be to the CEO or the managing director or the chief executive. It can be to any other senior management personnel if the organization insists on it. It's not ideal, but if the organization insists on it, it is fine. But some safeguards will need to be put in place. I think we'll look at that either here or in the next few slides. Where there's that, now there can be interferences and undue limitations that affect independence. These interferences will include delayed provision of info or not having access to certain personnel or physical access to certain things. And then undue limitations may include limiting your budget or not giving you enough staff to do your work. All these need to be considered when considering the independence, organizational independence of the internal audit department. Then independence, impairment evaluation. It is a responsibility of the CAE to actually see that, is there any actual potential or perceived impairment to the internal audit department, and what can be done to strengthen our independence. And then, as I mentioned, if we take on roles beyond your regular assurance and advisory, a plan should be documented to transition from those non-audit roles. The CAE has a responsibility to discuss. Typically, it says that 12 months, once you transition, 12 months, you can come back and do an audit. But whether that needs to be extended, the CAE needs to consider that based on various circumstances. And then, of course, the CAE will suggest safeguards that help to protect independence. There are some key situations or examples that are stated as part of Standard 7.1 that affect the independence or impair the independence of the internal audit department. They include suppressing or changing internal audit findings. I think we are all aware of that. Audit of the CEO. So I mentioned that the CEO need not be the person that administrative reporting goes to. But what they are saying is that if it is given, because typically you wouldn't audit the CEO. You may audit every department, but you may not necessarily audit the CEO directly. So if the CFO, for instance, or the director of finance is made, your administrative reporting is to that person, and you are doing a treasury audit or you are doing a cash management audit, then indirectly it could affect your independence. So even though that role of administrative reporting can be given to another senior management, it could impact on administrative reporting if you are auditing someone that reports to the director of finance, or you're auditing himself. Again, if you have to provide assurance over areas that are supervised by the CA, in some organizations, you see that the head of internal audit is also playing an acting role in another department. If you have to provide assurance over that area, definitely to affect the independence of the department. The budget reduced to level that limits fulfillment of approved plan. We can only give you so much to carry out your audit activities. If it is not sufficient, it impairs independence. Non-audit role due to organizational resource limitations. Like I said, beyond compliance, you may even be asked to do things that ideally internal auditors shouldn't do. Okay. So what are some of the examples of evidences of conformance? The charter capturing the reporting line, that is functional and administrative reporting, goes a long way to support organizational independence. Documentation showing that the CAE confirmed.
Girls.
Okay. Confirmed with the board the ongoing independence. So where there's documentation of discussions with the board, where the internal audit charter itself shows that there's some coordination between internal audit and the board. Standard 7.2, qualifications of the head of internal audit, or CAE qualifications. What are the requirements when it comes to standard 7.2? The CAE must help the board understand the qualifications and competencies of a CAE. Most audit committees may not even know of the existence of the certified internal auditor designation. They may know ACCA, they may know ICA, they may not know anything beyond those two. They may not know CESA, they may not know other qualifications. So it's a responsibility of the CAE to have that, even though the board should know, to have that interaction with them, to just let them know that for this role, we think these are the certifications or the qualifications that should be looked at. Provide example of common and leading qualifications and competencies, and maintain and enhance the qualifications and competencies as the head of internal audit yourself. What are the board's essential conditions? Identify the necessary qualifications, experience, and competencies of the CAE. The standard says that CIA and other certifications are critical for heads of internal audit. And then the board has a responsibility to engage with senior management to appoint the CAE with appropriate qualifications. I already explained a few slides that in some jurisdictions, the board is heavily, or the audit committee is heavily involved in the recruitment of the CAE or the head of internal audit. And then it's the board responsibility to have a succession plan in place. Again, in those jurisdictions, because it's a rotation, they can decide that after 5 years, we are bringing in this other person. And so they should have a succession plan in place for either because the person is retiring or they intend to change the person because of performance. Senior management needs to engage with the board to determine the CA's qualification. So even though the board is responsible for identifying the qualifications, it's an agreement or it's a discussion with senior management on what really works. And that's why the CAE has a requirement to make both the board and senior management aware of what qualifications they should be looking at for the head of internal audit. And senior management also has to enable the appointment and remuneration of the CAE, appointment through the HR processes. When it comes to implementation considerations, board and senior management need to have a comprehensive understanding of the standards to be able to recruit right. Because if senior management will be involved in any interviews for the head of internal audit and they know nothing of the standards and they know very little about internal audit, I'm just wondering who really recruits the head of internal audit. So it's the responsibility of the CAE, one way or the other, to make senior management and the audit committee aware of the standards so that at least if they will, they can also use that as a guiding criteria when it comes to recruitment. The board and senior management need to draw a plan of CIA and other certification experiences required for the head of internal audit role, determine the industry and sector experience required for that particular institution or organization to head it. What sort of industry or sector experience do you need? Because remember, the head of internal audit role is so critical to ensuring that governance processes, risk management, and control processes are effective. And so they need to recruit the right person. So industry and sector experience required for head of internal audit is important. Leadership experience is important. The person's ability to manage departments or to manage staff, experience in building people, all those things are important. Encouraging the head of internal audit to pursue CPDs, be part of professional associations and all of that is part of the board and senior management's responsibility to enhance internal audit for the benefit of the organization as a whole. What are some of the evidences of conformance when it comes to CAE qualification that we are meeting the standard? Okay. Documented approval of CAE's JD or appointment, professional educational plans, and then if we have succession plans in place, those also help. Finally, with Principle 8, the internal audit department is overseen by the board. The principle states that the board oversees the internal audit function to ensure the function's effectiveness. What are the key things when it comes to the overview of Principle 8? Being crucial to IIA effectiveness, achieving the principle requires collaborative and interactive communication between the board and the CAE. So we've already talked about that extensively, that there needs to be effective and even private conversations between the board and the CAE. Assessments of the CAE's and then the department's performance through the Quality Assurance Improvement Program is also critical. And then reviewing the results of Quality Assurance Improvement Programs, remedial actions to be taken, and the progress is also important. Standard 8.1 is on board interactions. So this delves a bit into the board interactions with the CAE. What are the requirements? The CAE must provide the board with the relevant information for them to be able to have their oversight effectively over internal audit. And then the CAE reports to the board QAIP results, potential impairments, the plan which is approved, progress and revision to the plan. And as we mentioned earlier, where we disagree with management on certain actions, those are all part of the interactions we are supposed to have with the board. The essential conditions for the board and senior management is to communicate with the CAE to understand what are the objectives, what are the strategies, what are the risks that we expect you to have in perspective when you are preparing your plan and carrying out your activities. And then communicating the expectations of the frequency of receiving communication. So the board may say that even though we meet quarterly, every month we want you to give us an overview of what has been done. It's within their rights to do that. Senior management also has to communicate any strategies, risk, or opinions about the plan for inputs into the preparation of our plan, internal audit plan, and then assist the board with governance, risk management, and control processes. Key considerations are that there should be an effective two-way communication between the board and CAE that has been emphasized. There should be periodic confirmation of the frequency and nature of communication. Most audit committees will not call the CAE to say, can we have discussions before every board meeting, or can we meet every month or have discussions every month? So the CAE has a responsibility to champion some of these discussions. Again, if we need to escalate disagreements with senior management that we agree or do not agree with, these are things we need to discuss with the board. How do we confirm conformance to this standard? Again, agenda or minutes will show it. Presentations will show that there are interactions between internal audits and the board. And then communications sent to the board will also evidence that. Standard 8.2 is on resources. So these are resources for the internal audit department. In a nutshell, the internal audit department, the CAE has a responsibility to ensure that we have enough to carry out our mandate, whether it's technology, whether it's people, whatever it may be, whether it's budget, we should have enough resources to carry out our mandate. What is the responsibilities of the board and senior management? The board has a responsibility to coordinate with senior management to ensure indeed they are providing enough for work to be done. Also to interact with the CAE to see if there are any challenges when it comes to resourcing that makes sense for them to support, and then they can go ahead and support. They also need to have discussions with the CAE to see that if we can't provide the number of people you need to fulfill your plan, what can be done? And that's the last 2 points we have. The senior management has a responsibility to determine the resources required. And if they cannot provide those resources to the internal audit department, they should be able to support with other alternative options to achieving the goal of having enough resources. The CAE will obviously have a responsibility to ensure that you've drawn up a plan that says that these are the resources we need. This is the gap we have. These are the number of man hours needed to do the audits. These are the kind of experiences and competencies we need in a department that we don't have. It's easier to have a documented strategy and plan on resourcing and then champion those discussions with senior management and the board than just to say, we need people, we don't have enough people. And so that's what this is summarizing. Evidence of conformance, again, meeting agendas and minutes will prove it. If you've drawn up a strategy and plan, it will also show that indeed we are considering resources. If there are any emails sent on resourcing to management, senior management, and the board, they also serve as evidence for any third party that the head of internal audit considers the resourcing requirements and discusses with senior management and the board. Standard 8.3, which is our last but one, is on quality. What are the requirements when it comes to quality? The CAE has a responsibility of developing a quality assurance and improvement program that covers both internal and external assessments. For internal assessments, the standard says that annually you should communicate the results because that is handled internally. But for the external assessments, as soon as they are completed, you are required by the standards, if you choose to conform, to immediately report the results and your remedial actions. Both reporting include how we conform to the standards, and if we have to comply with certain laws and regulations, like in the public sector in Ghana, we need to state that as well, and how the CAE intends to remediate the deficiencies identified. The board has to discuss in terms of the essential conditions, discuss the QIP with the CAE, understand what the internal audit department wants to do when it comes to internal and external assessment, assess the effectiveness. If a review is done internally or externally, the board has a responsibility to review the results, even give timelines and follow up with internal audit to close the remedial actions or the recommendations made by the assessor. And then senior management has a role to participate in the annual assessment of the CAE and the IIA function by the board, achieved by the Quality Assurance Improvement Program. The head of internal audit responsibility is to determine the scope and frequency of both internal and external assessment and discuss it with the board. The audit committee will not know that once every 5 years, we are supposed to do an external quality assessment. It is the head of internal audit who will know and should communicate this to the audit committee. What is required from the standards? What is our plan? Internal, we do it once every 2 years, we do it once every year, we do it twice every year. That should be communicated. And assessments of internal assessment should include things like cost efficiency, how well we are doing in terms of plan versus actual hours. So it shouldn't be strictly how we are conforming to the standards. There are other measures that can be considered to confirm conformance to the standards and generally leading practices. What are the evidences? If we have a documented quality assurance improvement program, it's evidence. If the head of internal audit has done presentation on the results of the QAIP internal or external assessment, it's also evidence. If there's a meeting agenda or minute to support that, it's also evidence that indeed we are complying with standard 8.3. Finally, standard 8.4, external quality assessment. So I'm sure we are all aware we have internal assessment that are handled internally. External assessments can be full external assessment that are given out to an outsider to do, or what we call self-assessment with independent validation, where the internal audit department, that's the assessment, just like the external quality assessment. And then an external person is asked to review and then make some inputs and conclusions on what we have done. The standards require that at least one person on the external assessment team should be an active CIA, not just a CIA, but an active CIA. And of course, external assessment should be carried out once every 5 years. However, some organizations may determine that we want to do that once every 3 years is permitted, as long as it doesn't go beyond 5 years. Essential conditions of the board is to understand the plan put in place for external assessments, if there are any regulatory or legal requirements, approve the frequency and the scope of how often we'll do these external assessments, and then review the actions that the head of internal audit says they will take based on the issues and then the timelines. And then senior management has to review the results and collaborate with parties. For instance, internal audit may be asked to acquire certain technologies or certain resources. Senior management has a role to play in supporting the external quality assessment results. When it comes to considerations, I think these basically have to do with ensuring that you are getting a competent team or assessor. One person can do it, a team can do it, but it's the responsibility of the head of internal audit to ensure that we are getting a good assessor or assessment team to do the external quality assessment. There are additional requirements under the global internal audit standards. Aside the fact that one person should be CIA, which was already there, the person should have completed one person in the team should have completed external quality assessment training, which is recognized by the IIA. They have that training online. And then the person should have the necessary experience, and also states that there is no conflict with them carrying out the external assessments. When it comes to what we call the self-assessment with independent validation, which is a form of external assessment, the responsibilities of the CA is to ensure that a comprehensive internal assessment similar to the external one was done, and that validation by a qualified independent external quality assessment team or assessor is undertaken, which I mentioned in the previous slide. They also need to make sure that if we are using this particular approach to the external assessment, then we benchmarked with similar organizations in our industry and not just looked at the standards. There are some limitations, let me not say limitations, there are some prohibitions when it comes to external quality assessments. Company A cannot do, if they have the requisite skills, they cannot do an external assessment for company B and B does for A. However, if there are 3 or more, and it won't be changed in terms of who assesses who, it is permitted. And then I think the key thing is to ensure that there's independence and objectivity when it comes to these assessments, external assessments especially. What is the evidence of the external assessment? Presentations by the head of internal audit or the head of the assessment team. There will be a report when an assessment is done. So this also proves. And then as usual, meeting minutes, evidencing, discussions on the external assessment results and remedial actions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. I'll end here.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reuben. Please, any questions should be dropped into the chat box. Mr. Ofori, we have a few questions. Please, if you have any questions, you can drop them into the chat box so that we can. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think the first question is from Emmanuel and Dowona. His question is, when the chief audit executive meets privately with the audit committee without management, should the secretary, who is not an audit committee member, be available for taking minutes, or this can be done by the chief audit executive?
Okay, so should I answer, or you bring a few more questions and then I take all?
Okay, I think the second one is, so far we have two, so let me read the second one so that you answer. The second question is by Mitchell. He wants to know what the difference is comparing the old and the new audit chapter.
Sorry, I didn't hear the second question. Sorry about that.
He wants to know the difference between the old and the new audit charter.
Okay, all right. So for the first question that has to do with direct interactions with the audit committee chair, they can be formal or informal. For instance, if you want to meet the audit committee chair over lunch, maybe the secretary will not be there to take minutes. I think the key objective of that meeting is, are there things that the audit committee chair should be aware of? So for instance, we intended to do 10 audits during the year. However, due to certain resource limitations, we'll do 8. You don't always want to wait till the next audit committee meeting, because these meetings happen at best quarterly. And so if that sort of relationship has been established, you can have that formal 5-10 minute meeting. There may be some significant things happening in the organization that involve senior management that you want the head of the audit committee to be aware. In such an instance, you may also not want a secretary to be there, depending on confidentiality issues. And so you'd want to meet the head of the audit committee to have those discussions. However, if based on the nature of the relationship with the audit committee, he wants to have somebody there to capture relevant things, because you are taking the information, you will definitely have a pen and a paper to note down any comments from the head of audit committee. You can do that. But if the head of audit committee wants to have someone there to just note down the key things you're going to discuss with them, as long as confidentiality is ensured, I don't think there's any problem with that. The new and the old audit charter. So there's no new audit charter per se. There was a template that the IIA released a couple of years ago to guide preparation of the internal audit charter. They are only saying under the global internal audit standards that even though you have to comply with this, they obviously don't know the laws and regulations that apply to every country and jurisdiction. So we have, as I mentioned, 2 examples, PFME and IIA regulations for the public sector that you can incorporate. And we talked about senior management's expectations and inputs to the charter, the board's expectations or the audit committee's expectation and input to the charter. So once they give it to you, you have to find somewhere to put it in your charter. So there's not much of a difference, but there are certain key things that should be in the charter. So when it comes to the responsibilities, the mandate, the purpose, the authority, when it comes to unrestricted access, when it comes to assurance and advisory and other things you can't do. So there are key things that should be captured for it to be considered to be conforming, but there's no strict sort of rule to how it should be developed. I don't know if that answers the first and second questions. Thank you, Esther.
Samuel, just on the charter, for all of us on the call, Global has issued a template, a revised template that conforms with the new standards. So if anybody wants to confirm whether there are differences, you can actually download those templates. There is one that is general, and there's one that is adapted for public sector internal auditing. And there are even guidances on how you can adapt the charters to suit your peculiar environment. So kindly access those materials on the Global website. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It means I have not even seen it myself. So thank you so much, President. I think the key thing is to ensure that you don't restrict yourself to whatever template they've given because of your jurisdiction. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Samuel. Please, just a quick one before I continue with the question. A link has been placed in the chat box for us to give a review, a survey on the presentation. Please, let's kindly endeavor to do it. The next question. Someone, please, the next question is, can someone access the online program you mentioned without having the IIA certification?
President, if you could help me with this. I know when you go to the Global's website, there are quite a number of trainings. I think they are both for members and non-members, so you can. But when it comes to the exams and anything else that relates to IIA Global, you pay so much when you're not a member. It doesn't even, for a lack of a better word, make sense not to be a member, because it takes you so little to be a member of the local IIA Ghana, and then they facilitate, being a global member, and then you can get as much as $500 off. I think the last time I checked, if I'm not mistaken, is a little over $1,500 or $2,000 for that particular qualification. And so if you can save $500 under the current economy, which is about 7,000, it will take you 100 or 50 CDs. I don't even know if it's free. President can correct me, to sign up to be a member. So yes, you can do it as a member or non-member, but please, there's no resource you should pay for on the IIA Global's website when you're not a member, because you definitely pay more, and mathematically may not be too advisable to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, the next question. In the presentation, you mentioned that it is the head of audit's responsibility to get an external assessor. Will this not compromise on the quality of the external assessment, knowing very well that it is his work that is going to be reviewed?
Will this
Please,
not
did you
work?
get the question? Will it not compromise the quality of the external assessment, knowing that it is his work that is going to be reviewed?
Not necessarily. So I think that ideally what should happen is maybe we don't really follow what is done, if I should say, in this part of the jurisdiction, because ideally when you get an external person, you will not engage them alone. And most of the people who currently do these external assessments are probably the big four audit firms. I know there are smaller firms who may do it, but your PwCs, KPMGs, and so on are the ones who do it. They will most likely not infringe on their independence. And so that's the first thing I want to say about that. Secondly, there are certain criteria that should be met. And ideally, when you pick somebody to be an external assessor and they meet all of that, you're supposed to send it to the audit committee and say, because remember, we said you are going to discuss the frequency of when you do external quality assessments and who you are selecting. So ideally, it should go to the audit committee to approve. And again, if they are, in quotes, doing their work well or as they should be able to do their own investigations and see, is it best to use this person? So for instance, if I left an audit firm and I'm calling my friend in the audit firm to do an external assessment, is it ideal if I was in that position to select a person? So if the process is working and it goes to the audit committee and you are also following the requirements, because I don't know if I skipped that slide, there's a requirement that says that if you are the external auditors, you can't do it. If you provide advisory services to the organization, you can't do it. There are so many conditions that prohibit certain individuals or organizations from doing it. So if you are following through with that and getting appropriate approval from the audit committee, independence may not be 100% reduced, but it will be there. And people care about their reputation. So I'm not sure anyone will come and do an assessment and just throw the issues away professionally. I don't know if that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, the next question. You mentioned that in Ghana, the practice in most public institutions has to do with management, approving the budget for the internal audit. You mentioned that in Ghana, the practice in most public institutions has to do with the management, approving the budgets for the internal audit. Mr. Adolf, can you please come again with your question? It's not clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think he needs to add up to the question.
Yeah.
The next question. Please, can a board chair write a report about staff too?
Sorry, Esther, your line.
Write a report? Can you hear me, please?
Yes, it's clearer now. Sorry.
So the next question is, can a board write a internal audit?
I don't know if I'm the only one, but her voice went off and on.
Okay, Samuel, it goes this way. Please, can a board chair write a report about staff of IA, that's internal audit, to the chief of institution without meeting the staff of the internal audit? And if yes or no, what action can the internal audit staff take?
The board chair is writing a report about the internal audit function to senior management.
Yes.
I'm a bit lost as to what's in that report. So I think that because of the relationship between senior management and the board, if the board chair or the audit committee chair has a problem with internal audit, the CAE, the head of internal audit, or a staff, or the function as a whole, yes, they can discuss with senior management. If they have reservations about the quality of your work and they want to put it in writing, definitely they can put it down. Ideally, before that to be written, it to be discussed with the head of internal audit. If there's any dissatisfaction with work or anything, that will be discussed before that communication is sent to the managing director or CE. However, as an audit committee chair, or as a board chair, they may not necessarily oblige to do that professional courtesy. So I don't see what you could do. If I'm a board or audit committee chair and I choose to flout professional courtesy and then state my reservations or dissatisfactions with the head of internal audit or the function, yes, I can go ahead and do that. I don't know if there are any remedial actions, legal remedial actions for that, but yes, I see the head of the audit committee or the board chair doing that if they choose to, which is obviously not a norm or advised.
Okay, thank you. So back to the question that it states that, please, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, loud and clear, please. Sorry about it.
Okay. So you mentioned that in Ghana, the has to do with management approving the budget to the internal audit department. Is it a good practice, and what can be done about it? I see the same thing happening with promotions of the internal audit subordinate. How should it be approached?
Okay, I lost you at a point, but I think it has to do with the point I made about how in most foreign jurisdictions, the budget has to be, budget, remuneration, appointment, renewal of the CA has to be done by the audit committee, but it's not like that in our jurisdiction. I think it just happens to be how things work here. The standards, ideally, because the standards are made, if I should say in a way, biased towards what happens in the Western world, in quote. So you'd get most foreign organizations complying with that. Not all of them may do that. Unfortunately, here, we recruit the head of internal audit as part of our regular recruitment processes. So there's nothing that can be done. The only remedial action is that if the head of internal audit feels that by carrying out my work objectively, or by ensuring that the department is independent, I'm being unduly punished, my appraisal is being affected, my promotion is being affected. If the relationship with the audit committee chair is working effectively, then this becomes one of the discussions you can have with them privately, that we are putting in the effort, we are meeting our mandate, we are fulfilling our plan, timelines, and all of that. But I think there's a perceived notion from my end that I'm being unduly punished because of the sort of issues I'm raising. I know that the IIA, has some remedial actions in place or reporting channels in place for any challenges you may have with the head of an institution when it comes to remuneration, promotion, and things like that, especially if you're in the public sector. If you're in the private sector, it's easier because most likely you'd be able to follow the standard and say that we are having challenges with remuneration and promotion because of the nature of our work. So I think that's what you can do. I don't see the situation changing in Ghana, where now they'll say all staff of the internal audit department will be recruited through the regular HR processes, but for only the head, we are going to get the person, submit the names to the CA. Probably we can get there in the future, but it's a far stretch, if you ask me. And so there are some remedial processes in place to sort of curb any effects of any actions by senior management on the department and the head. And I think we should take advantage of those especially private interactions with the audit committee and the board. I don't know if that answers your question, sir, or lady.
Okay, thank you. So the next question. In a situation where the managing director doesn't want a certain portion of the audit report to go out to IIA, with the mindset that it will dent its reputation because he's the chief spending officer, how do we go about it? Second, is it ideal for internal auditor to perform pre-audit and go back to perform post-audit on the very document he has already pre-audited?
Let me answer the second question and then you can repeat the first question again. Sorry. The second question on pre-audit and whether you can go back and do post-audit. So this is not the view of IIA per se, because I don't think we've had that discussion. But ideally, pre-audit should not be the role of an internal auditor. I know the jurisdiction we are in, the risk of fraud, how we want to prevent rather than post-audit and all of that. That's a very lengthy discussion that I don't know if we can handle here. But pre-audit, strictly going by the standards, the purpose of internal audit and all of that, pre-audit does not fall within the remit of an internal audit function. It does not. However, if for some instance you have to do, for some reason, you have to do pre-audit, then you are now going into what we discussed under organizational independence, where we are saying that if you have done pre-audit, then you cannot go and do post-audit. And I don't know if I should have mentioned that, but if you need to do, because I mentioned that if you are in charge of compliance department because of resourcing challenges, compliance is a second line auditable unit. So if that auditable unit needs to be audited for various reasons, you have to include it in the plan. Then you need to get an external person. There are big four audit firms, there are other audit firms who are able to audit that particular process. So ideally, that's how it should be done. I'm well aware that in the public sector, there are a lot of challenges with doing the pre-audit and going back to do the post-audit. Personally, and this is my view, it shouldn't be encouraged. I know the objective, but there's a way around it. One of the things I have said or thought about personally is that if you have a team of 5 and you want people to pre-audit maybe vouchers being paid or invoices being paid, you can have 2 people doing that, and they don't have to be called internal audit because we didn't define internal audit ourselves. It's a profession. It has its definition and what we should do. So if you want 2 people to do pre-audit, you can set them aside and call them invoice checkers, compliance, quality, whatever, something else. But if you are an internal auditor, pre-audit is not part of your role under any circumstances, under any jurisdiction for you to do. If you have to do it, then definitely you shouldn't be doing any post-audit on that. But the pre-audit discussion, if we go into it, we won't finish. So I think I'll leave it here. Esther, please, if you could help me with the first question. I lost a bit of it.
Okay, so I hope you can hear. In a situation where the managing director doesn't want to set IIA with the mindset that it will dent his reputation because he's the chief.
I wish someone would confirm if I'm the only one who, when Esther speaks, it goes on and off, because when President spoke, it was very, very clear. Esther, sorry, I hear you, then it goes off and on.
Yes, I also have the same problem with Esther's sound.
Her line is breaking.
So the question goes this way. In a situation where the managing director doesn't want a certain portion of the audit report to go out to IIA with the mindset that it will dent his reputation because he is the chief spending officer, how do we go about it? Is it ideal for the internal auditor to perform pre-audit? So that was the question before the pre-audit part.
Okay, all right. So you want to report something and then the chief spending officer says, take it out, or the CE says, take it out. I think, President, you addressed this at when Anas did the part 1, but we'll talk about it again. The IIA has, again, the IIA has some reporting processes. The IIA has some reporting processes to deal with situations like that. And so it's encouraged that when you strongly feel that these findings are crucial for strengthening the control environment and control processes and risk management processes, you sort of use those channels to do your reporting. I've always said, and I maintain as my personal opinion, is that the nature of our work, there will always be some occupational hazards in terms of, even if you use IIA and you're able to remediate it, some way, somehow, sometimes, especially in the public sector, there are some punitive, indirect punitive measures like being transferred and all of that. So when you use the channels that are available through the IIA to do those reporting, and in quote, you have to suffer for doing the right thing, I think it then just comes down to your values. What values do you hold? Would you keep your job because you have a family and things to take care of and drop the issues? Or you are going to say that these are my values. I went through IAA. Now they are transferring me or doing this or doing that or not promoting me. And I'm willing to go through that pain and suffering because of my values, because I did the right thing. So I think those are the two things. IAA will support you, but sometimes the chief spending officer may find a way of still frustrating your work and all of that. Are you willing to suffer that as part of being an internal auditor because it's part of our profession? Or you keep dropping issues from it and just be ticking the box at an internal auditor, but not really delivering any value? I'll leave that answer to you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So the next question is, should the internal audit department include an assessment on developing a risk register for the organization you work with in the audit charter?
Should we include the development of a risk register in the audit charter?
Register.
I think two of the core roles that you see internal audit venturing into a lot, aside from the core internal audit assurance role, is risk management and in some places compliance. When it comes to risk management, the IIA has a document, I've forgotten what it's called. They have a position on risk management where they talk about things that are prohibited for you to do in terms of in the risk management space. Then they have another set of things that you can do, but you need to put in place. So things that you can't do at all, things that you can do, but you need to put in place safeguards to protect yourself. And then things that you can do in the risk management space. The development of a risk register is one of the things you can do, but you are doing it to support management and hand over to them, because risk management in itself is a second line role. And so it's an auditable unit. However, just like the compliance example I gave, if you take in the role of risk management, either just developing a risk register or taking on the entire role of risk management, then obviously it's not an auditable unit you should bring in. If we need to review or audit our risk management process, then we need to get an external person to come and say how well we are doing, because we are handling it as internal auditors. So yes, in a nutshell, you can develop an internal, you can develop a risk register for the organization, hand it over to them. You actually need this if you are not in the public sector where the IIA guides the development of a risk register. You actually need this even in the private sector to be able to determine your internal audit plan. So even if the organization doesn't have a strategic risk register, you need one to be able to do your plan. So in any case, you develop one if there's no risk department or the organization hasn't made someone. So in itself, it's not a problem.
Okay. Please, the next question. Your presentation emphasized on the board. The person wants to know what the position of the audit committee is.
Okay, so I mentioned during the presentation that I was using board, audit committee, risk and audit committee interchangeably. The standards use board because they don't know what happens around the world in various jurisdictions. So board, definitely you would have a board, or let me say most likely you'd have a board, but not all boards have audit committees. So it's just used interchangeably: board, audit committee, risk and audit committee, as long as the function they play is it helps us to do a functional reporting to them, our plan is approved by them, our charter is approved. Once they are playing that role, whatever name they are called, the standards recognize them as the governing body for the internal audit department. So it's just used interchangeably.
Okay, thank you. I think this question has been answered partially, but just to read it. In what sense do you view pre-audit exercise in the public sector, which is meant to pre-screen transactions such that internal audit does not go after the fact, but adopt preventive approach, impair the independence of the internal auditor?
Yes, I don't know if I should answer it again, but I think I spoke at length about that. Probably the only other thing I would say is, for me, and again, this is my personal view, hasn't been discussed with IIA because obviously we don't know all the questions that will come up on the call. But my personal view is that, you see, if you are the head of internal audit, and this pre-audit mostly has to do with finance-related transactions. But I tell you that if you are the head of internal audit and management trusts you to do pre-audit, are they trusting you to do it because you are sitting in internal audit or because of your competence? Because if you are able to do your pre-audit very well, and tomorrow they move you to head of finance, they will still get somebody to do pre-audit. Indirectly, what that means is that no matter who we put in finance, we don't trust the person, we can't punish the person, so someone else should look at it. So I have very strong views about pre-audit. Should it be done? Yes, by all means, it should be done. Should it be done by internal audit? No, it shouldn't be done by internal audit. You can create a function, get approval, create a function, a sub-department that is not part of internal audit to do pre-audit. But what you are doing is you are transferring for lack of a better word, the incompetence, the carelessness, and the deliberate fraud of the head of finance or whoever else is involved in that finance process. You're just transferring it to another person. Because when we do pre-audits, we get a lot of, and I'm sure the public sector people can confirm, get a lot of issues where we are saying, change this, take this back. Why does it keep coming to us? It's like they are testing us to see which one we won't see for it to pass. So if they can't do the work well, then somebody in management to say, if audit keeps saying change this is wrong, they are overpaying and all of that, then they are incompetent people, in quotes, forgive my words, but they are incompetent people managing the finance function, so they should be fired, so that you who are so good to detect all these things should go there. The point is, if you go there, they'll still say, now that you've moved there, they don't trust you. And so they should bring someone else to now review your work. So really, if you think about it in that sense, it doesn't make sense. But I agree that to prevent fraud from happening, especially being prevalent in Ghana, especially in the public sector, there's a need to have somebody playing that oversight role to like double and triple check pre-audit transactions. That's my personal view, just to reiterate that point on pre-audit. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if this question will be for you or for President. How do we write the CIA exams? And the next question is, does the audit committee chair have the mandate to write and sign a letter on behalf of the committee, inviting staff of the organization to appear before the committee to answer questions?
Okay, I think President will help with the CIA one, but I know the IIA has first of all, you need to sign up with the IIA Ghana. They will link you to the global, you go through the registration process, submit all your degrees and all the requirements, very flexible requirements. Once you've done that, I know there are textbooks that the IIA has to sell to you if you want to do a self-study. If you want to study, as in get someone to tutor you. I know that I has some upcoming trainings in place for the CIA and the challenge exam and all of that. So you can reach out to the Secretariat for more details. They will give you all the information you need to register first of all, and then to write. If you are a CIA, if you are an auditor and you're a lifetime auditor, you're not doing a few years in audit and moving to another department, I strongly encourage you should do the CIA exams. The second question has to do with the head of the audit committee inviting management. So I'm assuming when we've written audit reports and we say that a responsible person is director of finance, director HR, and they are writing to answer questions. Remember, the head of the audit committee, they are like, for lack of a better word, they are bosses, right? So if they choose to call the CEO, call the chief spending officer, call the MD, call the director of finance to ask them on issues relating to the report, issues relating to finance, issue relating to recruitment, whatever, they are well within their right. They are a subcommittee of the board. They have the same authority of the board. It's just that they are supposed to focus on, depending on your structure, audit and risk or audit alone. But yes, they can invite anyone to come and answer any question, especially if it has to do with reports you've submitted to them. I don't know if that answers your question, sir.
But if this is a contribution by Enoch, it says some industries like banking advocate for both pre-audit and post-audit by the regulators. Whenever there is no evidence of it being done, they usually put it in their examination reports. I think it's a contribution. The next one is also a contribution. The ERM fund shows the role of the IA in ERM. The holistic view of the designing and implementing internal control frameworks should be able to accommodate pre-audits. The head of finance can take on this role rather than IA to maintain the independence of the IA function. I think it's in line with what Samuel you said. Please,
Yeah, I think the second person
reminder,
is answering the first person.
Yes, please. The survey link is in the chat box. Let's all try to fill it. Okay. I think that's all.
I just want to say for the
the
question on the pre-audit and post-audit by regulators in the bank, and it's fine. But we also need to acknowledge that our regulators don't always know everything, right? Because like I said, the internal audit profession is guided by IIA Global, who have brought out the standards. So what individual countries choose to do, they are free to do it, but may not necessarily conform with the standards. But if we are going by the standards, then that's the perspective I'm bringing. Because I remember at the IIA conference a year or two ago, top politician, I mean, I don't want to mention, was saying that, yes, we've heard about the arguments against pre-audit, but it's pre-audit we want. We don't want post-audit. We don't want them to use the money and then we chase them. The argument is not about not doing what we call pre-audit. It's about putting pre-audit as a responsibility of internal audit, which flouts conformance with the standards. So yes, pre-audit should be done, but I think even some of the regulators need to understand who should do pre-audit. It's just the same people can be moved and made to do it. And that's a personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you too. Okay, I think we have two people who have raised their hand. Please let your question be short for lack of time. Mr. Mohammed Hadi Ahmed, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Please, if it's not ready, can Prince Odro ask his question?
Okay, good afternoon. Sorry, good afternoon to everybody. Mine is not really a question, but just a contribution to what Samuel has said. With respect to whether the audit committee chair can write reports about staff to management. Within the context of the public sector, most of our operations are guided by law. And so if you avert your mind to the provisions of the public financial management and its associated regulation, you find some information or evidences there that points to the powers of the audit committee. For example, if you look at the regulation 228, it spells out the powers of the audit committee in that in the event of them discharging their mandates, the committee has the power to investigate matters in relation to suspected cases of fraud or misuse of public fund. And once investigation is done, the report would come back to the committee. And then again, they must have a full access to management personnel records and other things. And then where they suspect fraud, they can also refer the chairperson of the audit committee, can also refer the matter to the principal spending officer, which may be the chief executive officer, or the principal account holder, which may be the Ministry of Finance, for investigation into the matter. So those issues respect to the audit chairperson writing to the staff, they have that capacity or that mandate to be able to do that if you look at the law itself. And then the regulation 229 also even look at the report of the audit committee and the fact that every half year they are supposed to do a report and send it to some stakeholders within the public sector, including the Ministry of Finance, the minister in charge of the sector, the Director General of the Internal Audit Agency, and then the chairperson of the board itself, and including the Auditor General. So within the law, that that provision or that right is there for the chair of the audit committee to be able to do that. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you so much for bringing that perspective. Thanks a lot. Yeah. I mean, even if the acts were silent, which they are not, thankfully, just by nature of them being being in the governance structure, from a governance perspective, it's not a prohibition for them to do that, unless there's a context to your question. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that will be all for the questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Samuel, Reuben, Ofori. It was such a wonderful presentation. I think there's another question, but that one is directed to the president. So while the president gives us the closing remarks, I will want him to answer this question. Please, can the president share the new model? Please, can the president share the new model, the new model of the internal audit charter with us, or share the link of where I can get it downloaded? And also, please, the slides will be sent to us after the webinar, so we all get it through our email. Mr. President, can you please give us a closing remarks?
Thanks very much, Esther. I was trying to do, okay, I tried engaging. Okay, I think my video is functional now. Thanks very much, Samuel, for such a great job. And I would also thank all of us for staying on for this long. This is a very interesting one. I think before I proceed, I would attempt a response to an earlier question that was asked about whether the audit committee chair can write directly to the staff. As the other person contributed, it is within the rights or the purview of the audit committee to function just as it's supposed to function as a subcommittee of the board. Except that when it comes to good corporate governance, one always expects that the board would want to work through the chief executive or the head of the entity, so that the head is not seen to be undermined by the board or the audit committee. So ideally, whilst they have the authority or the powers, I would suggest that for good corporate governance, they could have done that. That invitation could have gone through the head of the organization. That way, it demonstrates that they expect or they respect the head enough or trust in the head to be able to rally the troops that he or she presides or superintends over. Other than that, I wouldn't say they're acting out of their powers, but it's just that they needed to follow those corporate governance procedures. And then I would also attempt to address the question about whether people can register for the QIAP certification, the Quality Assessment and Improvement Program course certification. Yes, they can as non-members of the institute, except that, as Samuel mentioned, it's more expensive. And then again, you are supposed to demonstrate that you have 3 to 5 years internal audit experience, and that you are conversant with the standards. I'm wondering how one would be demonstrating all of that without being proving that you've been a member of the institute. I mean, it then means that for you to prove that you have that much experience and exposure to the standards, and that you've been working, your experience in internal audit is in accordance with the standards. As a non-member of the institute, you have a bigger task proving these requirements as prerequisites before you can write that certification exam. But of course, as the IIA, it tries as much as possible to accommodate. It's just that the bar will be higher for you. Then again, I would want to touch on there was a question about the roles that you have to play in risk management. Usually, I would say that you need to bring in safeguards or prove that you've put in the safeguards that do not undermine your independence. So if you have to play consultancy role or consulting roles that tend to undermine your independence, it's important for you to discuss that with the audit committee or the board or senior management. Let them understand how that is impairing your independence, or that could impair your objectivity. And if they approve that, you go ahead and do it. Then it means that when it comes to reviewing those tasks or those functions, you will need to relinquish that to an external party or an independent party to carry out. Then there was a question about whether if the chief audit executive leads the sourcing of the external quality assessor or assessment team, wouldn't that undermine independence? Or independence. The standard has specified the qualifications for the external assessors or the team of assessors. So if you're doing it, you have to do it in accordance with all of those. If you don't, then any subsequent review of your processes can fail even that whole quality assessment process. So I think as internal auditors, let's be guided by that. Even when we engage external auditors, we still pay them. So if we're talking about impairments to some extent, one could always raise some of those as a way of a threat. Having put that aside, I would want to proceed to touch on a few things that we should be mindful of. That our board CEO and governance forum for 2024 would come off this time on the 18th. We had earlier mentioned that it would be on the 6th of November, but further developments regarding the venue and other events that have come up indicates that the only practical date for that event is the 18th of November. So please let us take note and start rallying our chief executives as head of audits or members of audit departments. Let's inform our heads of audits. Let us all prepare for this event. As we say, it's always an opportunity for audit committee members, chief executives to meet and discuss things at that higher level, which discussions at that higher level. Today, given what we just discussed today, it is an opportunity for us to foster those good relationships between the senior management boards, audit committees, and audit heads. The 2024 Chief Audit Executives and Certified Internal Auditors and IIA Council meeting or forum would come off on the 14th of November. So unfortunately, we had wanted to have the other one before this, but we would have to hold, 14th of December is when we will be having the one between Chief Audit Executives and then Certified Internal Auditors. That one will be in December. The 2025 Annual National Conference, we would have it in April. I'm saying this so that we can start planning. We would have that one in April. So please start preparing now that we'll be attending that in April. Maybe on the back of that, I want to remind all of us on call that the IIA's 2024 conference comes off in August this month. That's I think 22nd to 23rd of August. So those of us who have not yet concluded our approval processes, let's do that and attend. We have a memorandum of understanding with IIA, and we think that as many of us can attend these events, we should attend them because the professional discussions that go on there will inure to the benefit of all members of the Institute. Our 11th AFIA conference would come up in Kigali, in Rwanda, from the 26th to 31st of May, 2025. And during the AGM, I had cause to explain why I think that as many of us as possible should be able to attend this conference, if even it's not only for auditing reasons. And the international conference would come off in Toronto, Canada, from the 14th to the 16th of July. So we have our national conference in April. IIA's conference will be in May. International conference will be in July. Now, I also saw, given that a lot of questions were raised about the audit charter, the model audit charter, and then other materials, I encourage members to make it a habit to visit the global website very frequently. Some of the questions that we are asking about the differences and all of that, in fact, if you visit that website, you see that regarding the standards, there's a two-way matching of the new standards and the old standards. So you see where gaps are. You also see guidance on the roadmap that you can follow to transition from the current standards or the 2017 standards to the 2024 standards. So let's make good use of the content or the material that is provided at the global website, IIA website. It's part of the value that we get for being members of the Institute. Unfortunately, for the global guidances, which are being revised to reflect the new standard, the global internal audit standards, if you are not a member in good standing, I'm sorry, you will not be able to access those. The charter is freely available to non-members, but for those who are not in good standing, you will not be able to access the global guidance that or recommended guidances as they used to be. So please, let's make good use of the website. If even you are not in good standing, I'll still encourage you to visit it. Maybe if you go, there are some of the free stuff that will be available that you can use. But I would urge all of us on this call, as well as those that we know who should have interest in the content from IIA, that we should all strive to be in good standing so that we have unfettered access to all members-only materials. And we are calling on members to try and write articles for publication in our newsletter, in the quarterly newsletter. It is also a way for us to develop the skill to contribute to the Internal Auditor magazine. It's not beyond us for us to make contributions to write articles that can be published in that magazine. As IIA Ghana, we have people who are knowledgeable in these internal audit practice, who have several years of experience, and they should be able to contribute to knowledge expansion. And as we promised, the National Internal IIA Ghana WhatsApp, or the official IIA Ghana WhatsApp, will be put up. A link will be circulated to members, inviting you to join that WhatsApp group. You would see, once you join, you will see guidelines on the do's and don'ts of that group. And I wish to highlight that eligibility to stay on that group is dependent on being in good standing. So if members who fail to be in good standing, as at a given cutoff dates, would always be taken off the platform until they get back into good standing, and then they'll be reinstated. It's just proper that we keep it professional that way, so that if we are maintaining it for members, it should be for members in good standing. I'm just saying this so that we are guided, so that when we join and these actions are taken, we would understand. In the course of the meeting, I noticed that somebody asked whether we could have these meetings or these webinars later in the day from 5 onwards. Unfortunately, I think pushing it that way would then mean that we're keeping all, the person's excuse was that this affects work schedules. I'm also just suggesting that since these are communicated ahead of time, we should consider that this part of our continuous professional development and factor this time allocation to that. For those who are CIAs, you are required to meet some minimum hours of continuous education. And as we indicated, once we introduce the annual certification or annual issuance of annual certificates to members in good standing, there would also be minimum CPD requirements that come with that. And we think that members need to consider this time spent as investment in your personal development to increase your competency to do the work that you are required to perform in your organizations. Our next paid training program is going to be in fraud risk management, focusing particularly on procurement, and members to please take note of the details that will be communicated regarding this training so that you can take advantage of it. With this said, I wish to once again thank Samuel and Esther for taking us through this, and also to thank the Certification and Professional Development Committee for putting this together. If there are still any unanswered questions, feel free to send emails to the Secretariat so that we can address any concerns you would have that have not been addressed in this. But I urge you all to continue to complete the survey on this particular webinar so that we can improve going forward. Thanks very much. I hand you back to the organizers or the moderator for the rest of the closing issues.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. President. So it was nice having everybody here. I'll kindly ask Mr. Martin Donald to give us the closing prayer.
We thank you, Heavenly Father, for your grace that has been sufficient unto us and for this platform that we have used in this knowledge sharing session. We commit ourselves unto your care, that your presence will continue to lead us and to equip us, so we will be knowledgeable in this profession that we have chosen for ourselves, that we will be the sort of persons that you have called us to be in the institutions that you have put us in. So Ghana will be elevated beyond this level of glory unto an higher one. We thank you for our resource persons. We thank you for our moderators. We thank you for everybody that logged on. We know that, Lord, you have been good for us. May your name be glorified in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thanks, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Anas, today?
Ade here, Kule. Enjoy your evening. Yeah.
Okay, you too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I was about to call.
Oh.
Yeah.
Run.
No, I'm gonna do it next week.
KJ.
Next week, Saturday. Yeah. And then probably just, yeah. But, oh wait, then again, I'm off because the 19th, so I'll probably just do it during the week as opposed to the weekend. With me not doing it. Yeah. 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 So I'm going to see what they have available.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah. All right, so we'll talk later. All right, thank you. Bye.
I'll be calling and tell him to call your number in case he tries to
something that was supposed to be.
Why you missed that? No, I'm just saying that how to now. Okay, what's the number?
Well, take it down.
If you're watching, yeah.
Eyes are red.